is Roger Green, host of the Surfing the MASH Tsunami podcast. This week, we are offering 4 conversations from episode 2, our discussion with leading patient advocates, plus from the vault, a conversation from March 2023 with Jeff McIntyre about the value of MASH medications. In this conversation, our 4 patient advocates discuss their perspectives on Pi Day, or March 14th, the PDUFA date for Resmetirom at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. After years, or even decades of disappointments over drugs that failed to be approved, the advocates all describe their moods as, and I quote, guarded optimism. Part of the guarded nature of their optimism stems from the history I described. The other major element is the fear that approval will not lead to automatic or immediate access, and that this will disappoint many patients who've waited years for a MASH drug. Jeff McIntyre adds that the March 14th statement might not be a final decision per se, but a request for more data or analysis that would delay a final decision past the PDUFA date. He also notes that approval is hardly the end of the process for GLI, which will then work through all the steps necessary to translate that approval into successful access for the targeted patient population. He describes the steps GLI will take to work through this process, and then jumps past the U.S. to describe what he anticipates will be relatively fast and similar behavior, hopefully meaning approvals from other countries. This conversation yields 3 common themes: the guarded optimism of the patient advocates as they await the Resmetirom PDUFA date, their desire to be included in discussions about patient access and value, and finally, the different kinds of exciting work and programs each sees on the agenda for 2024. I always find our episodes and advocates to be equal parts energizing and thought-provoking, so just sit back, listen, learn, enjoy. When you're done, join the dialogue in our LinkedIn discussion group. So I mentioned Pi Day, which is actually something that just hit me as I was listening to Milan. But I think part of the reality we're all living in right now is that if you talk to anybody who's involved with the community and you ask them what's on your horizon, they all start by saying, well, there's March 14th, which, as we all know, is the PDUFA date for Resmetirom at the FDA. And with the release of the New England Journal article in the past week, I think there's been increasing excitement and energy everywhere, everyone I talk to. But it's interesting. It feels like one thing in the U.S., which is where the drug's going to get approved. And it's felt a little bit different in other places where the drug's not getting approved yet. So our first question, what I'd like to ask each of you to do, talk a little bit about the mood within your organization and your patient communities. And then Jeff, because I know that you've got portfolio both in the States and beyond, I'd love to get your feedback going last on how what you see is different between what you're hearing from folks in the States and folks in other places. Take one of the Americans first. Tony, Wayne, jump on it.
Tony Villiotti.
Yeah, I'd say the mood in our organization is kind of quiet optimism. We're kind of holding our breath a bit because, as long as there's uncertainty about what the FDA is going to do, it creates uncertainty in the minds of patients. But I think just this is a really landmark situation here where if the FDA finally recognizes that this is something patients want and need, that is going to be a major happening. So we're holding our breath a bit, waiting for it.
Okay. So any preparation for after you're done holding your breath, or right now you're still kind of in the breath holding phase?
The impact of drug approval won't really affect our day-to-day operations very much.
Okay.
We're doing no preparation for it.
All right. Wayne?
Wayne Eskridge.
I guess we're cautiously optimistic. We're concerned, I guess, about over-optimistic assumptions on the part of the patient community. People will have a sense that, we have a drug approved, I should be able to get it. And most of the population actually will have a lot of trouble getting it. There'll be quite a bit of patient stress because of insurance coverage, and there'll be articles that they read, and there'll be a lack of understanding of what the limitations are and what the concerns are for which patient groups are able to get it. So helping people understand the environment that we'll have the rest of this year is something that we're trying to think about how to focus on that, or how to help people understand what the reality is, because the fact that FDA issues that license does not mean that people suddenly can get help just by going to their doctor and say, I'd like to do this. So the patient stress that will come, there'll be optimism on the part of the patients, hopefulness, but also significant discouragement by a lot of them. So we worry about that.
Milan or Louise, just about what you're seeing where you live. And Louise, I guess you live in 2 places. And Milan, you've got a whole continent to deal with, but either of you go ahead.
Louise Campbell.
I think it's going to be interesting. I agree with Wayne. There certainly is from what I feel and what I see with people, a skepticism about how many people will be given access. And I think the devil's going to be in the detail. What do you have to have achieved to be eligible for treatment with Resmetirom or any of the medications coming up? Have we a structure in any healthcare to be able to jump those hurdles, or are we going to be inventing those hurdles to jump before you get access to the medication? And I think the US is going to be obviously the tester for that. It's got a big enough population of people affected to just primarily focus in the US. So it's going to be up to the rest of the world to develop their own strategies. Now, I think if I look at the UK, we're certainly well placed to be able to use non-invasive technologies to locate those at higher risk, to get them to the right people. Who's going to prescribe? Is this going to be endocrinology, who currently don't look for fatty liver disease and fibrosis? Is it going to be cardiology, who don't look for liver disease and fibrosis? Or are we purely going to pigeonhole this in the right way of being just liver disease? So I think that wouldn't necessarily be the right place, but it's currently where most of the patients discovered are located. So we have an interesting road ahead. If we look at Australia, we are still going to be approving ultrasound as the first non-invasive technology to locate fatty liver, which means a lot more processes to look at the fibrosis side because we don't have enough access. And obviously we're hoping to get Leon Adams and a couple of other physicians when they formally announce that. So I think we don't have universal ability to locate these conditions. That's the concern for me.
Milan Mishkovikj.
I agree with Wayne, with Louise. They give a bunch of examples where we can be somehow concerned about all the situation when it's going to come to access. Europe is a little bit different by the access because the social systems in different countries depends of the. Also, it's very important to see high income country, low income country, middle income country acceptance. Also, it's interesting. I know after FDA, EMA will try immediately to see all the possibilities for approval of the drug on the market. I think the bigger countries will have much easier success to get the access. This is the first, let's say, step. But I think USA, like one of the most important markets with all the characteristics, how Louise mentioned, will have enough, let's say, to see about the success of the drugs and everything, how it's going to go there, how to be changed in Europe. And we are very excited that in many countries we have, Europe is also very, very diverse and can be also a little bit tricky days, but in the moment through different kind of initiatives through the EU Council, maybe we can push to harmonize somehow some of the legislation for faster access of the drug and to see how will be the procedure. Also concerning me, also the same issues Louise mentioned, who is going to prescribe, how is going to go the process, what is going to be, because we have different countries with different strategies in Europe, but it's the best option, first of all, to have this access approved and the ongoing process, how to finish, let's say, the other challenges who's going to come on the way. We are happy, in the moment, and we are also concerned, how Louise mentioned. I hope so that everything is going to be in good relations with all stakeholders and how we will proceed, how to find a way, how the patient have much easier access to the drug.
So, Jeff, that gives you about 5 places to jump off, to start from.
Jeff McIntyre.
Well, I don't want to be redundant. Certainly, everybody makes really solid points on this. I would say that we are cautiously optimistic about the March 14th PDUFA. I think Resmetirom has everything in the right place, if you will, but there's always a little bit of an X factor when it comes to the FDA. And we know that it's, from history has taught us that it's not always approval or denial, but there could be some gray areas of sending it back for further information, et cetera, et cetera. And so when we see it, we'll believe it. That said, I think we very quickly move into the area of patient access. And so for us, if you read the Resmetirom studies, which I'm sure you guys all have as well, we're actually not talking about a huge group. Now, when we talk about fatty liver disease, we're talking between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 globally with it. But when we talk about the population that would be in the system now, this is not projected or, people that haven't been screened, we're looking at a much smaller number. And so, we're looking maybe between 300,000 and 400,000 or so in the United States for that. And so we want to make sure that the patients that are in the system that have the greatest need are able to get the access to that. And that's going to be through some education efforts. It's going to be through making sure that, the next step that's going to be so important in this is going to be the coding for this. And then as we work our way through the system, frankly, I don't know what the number is exactly, but the largest population that uses drugs that are approved by CMS for reimbursement. In the US, if you're not reimbursed, with a couple of exceptions for exceptional cases, like anti-obesity medications and insulin, I think, if you're not covered, it's almost not worth going to market with it on. And so pending the approval, and we have, like we said, the weather's, the wind's blowing in the right way from that. If you define the wind as the research and a favorable ICER hearing that they had off of this, we're cautiously optimistic on that as well. Our concerns when we begin to look at this, patient access, making sure it's the right patients to do this, that we get the coding, that we serve the patients that are already in the system. We do the here and now that's in front of us on this. And then we are able to engage with the payers. This is kind of the GLI strategy going forward with this, that as patients, we're engaging with the payers to make sure that they are aware that this happens, because we've got to have the reimbursement for this. If we don't, then not just the implications in the US, but that's when we begin to see those bridges globally begin to crumble, if you will, because if it's not covered by CMS, the likelihood of it being covered by NHS or being approved and covered by the EMA, those all become much more shakier foundations, if you will. And then once we've kind of established that pattern, then we can start talking with the private insurers to make sure that they catch up and that they're able to cover this as well. And we've laid a step-by-step foundation for building patient access by being able to do this. Internationally, again, I think EMA is going to be quick to follow on this, quick defined in bureaucratic terms, of course. We think that that's going to be something that will happen with that. And hopefully other hot spots, we would look to Latin America, certainly Mexico, and then Central and Latin America for hopefully a quick approval process pending we are able to go through these other steps on this. And then this is the point. This is the time where we finally get to answer or to engage a lot of the questions that I think people have kind of kept on the shelf for a little while of what's going to be the impact. Is there going to be a rush of people with all different stages of fatty liver disease clamoring for a drug that really only specifically targets a narrow focus? How can we adapt our education and empower primary care and hepatology to be able to best deal with that question? And I think there's a question, even we need not engage it today, but down the road, there's going to be a question when a medication is approved, how's that going to impact clinical trials? We know we've got a lot of assets in phase 2 and phase 3 on this. Will people start dropping out of, placebo-driven clinical trials if there's a medication available? That's going to be another question that we get to engage off of this. And so we're optimistic, but boy, there is a lot of work still in front of us.
And now, back to Roger.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this conversation or the entire episode, please put them in the review section of the page from which you downloaded this conversation, or send an email to questions@surfingmash.com. We'll be back next week with some of the leaders of the nomenclature process to discuss its successes, lessons, and next steps. Until then, stay safe, surf on. We'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.